Hey, why today? Why after we got all this figured out?
Right.
We're alive. It's going. All right, so hold on. Start the timer.
Uh,
Oh gosh, 2 minutes was not long enough. Okay, I said okay. Stop sharing. I was trying to connect you guys. I was trying to connect for like 10 minutes. And then I was like, it's just not going to work. And then it started working. And then I just was all flustered. So I got to keep typing this stuff up. And normally 2 minutes is more than enough. I can get it all in there. But apparently not today. Hi, ladies.
Hi.
All right. So welcome everybody. You know the channel, you know who I am, you know who these ladies are. Welcome to another edition of BiCrafty Bootcamp, where we are teaching crocheters how to knit, or honestly, even just people who want to learn to knit. You can jump in and use these classes as a tool for you. We've been doing some wonderful things over the last several weeks, and this week we get to do something fun. And I am going to let Chrissy talk about BiCrafty Bootcamp, just really quickly give the elevator speech for those of you who maybe just be like, what is this? What are they talking about? And then while you're doing that, I'm gonna finish the upload so people have links.
Yes, yes, yes. So, BiCrafty Bootcamp, we are in week 6, which is like so incredible to believe that we've been knitting for over a month. We've done it. That's amazing to me. So BiCrafty Bootcamp started because Catherine and I came to join Team Marley Bird, and neither of us knew how to knit. We're both pretty avid crocheters. We both love the fiber arts. And knitting is something that we wanted to do for years. And we hear all the time from crocheters about how they want to learn to knit. And this series is really geared, has a spin towards crocheters, but also is for any absolute beginner. We've had a lot of really great emails come in from people saying that they're loving boot camp so far, that even people who've been knitting for years are learning new things. A lot of throwers are learning how to pick, which is super exciting. A lot of English style knitters are learning how to knit continental. That's awesome. We're so excited for you. You can teach an old dog new tricks. So we're super excited for all of you who have joined us. And I have a giveaway today. It's our first boot camp giveaway. I'm so excited. And we're choosing our giveaway winner from the comments. Okay. So I am going to choose a random time throughout this video. And at that time, if someone has commented, I'm going to ask Catherine that person's name, and you will win our first boot camp giveaway. So super excited. Such a random way to choose. I love that. So it'll all be up to the cards.
I love that. I love giveaways. So it's fantastic to have one here on the channel. We haven't done it in so long. Since I stopped the podcast, I used to give something away every podcast. And then, I shouldn't say I stopped. We're on a hiatus. I
A
need to
brief
get my
hiatus.
mojo back
Yeah.
with that. So we're on just a little hiatus with the podcast. But
there
very
are
exciting.
a
I think that was
lot-
a very good elevator speech. Go ahead, Catherine.
I want people to know I've been watching some of the old podcasts, and there's a lot there on YouTube. So if you haven't watched them, like, it might be on hiatus, but there's lots of content in there to see.
There's
So
lots. I mean, like 13 or 14 years worth. So because not all on YouTube, but some of it's like
Right.
really bad audio podcasts, really bad audio. But hey, I didn't care. I just was excited to talk to people in this community because that's what I wanted to do. All right. So I need to go over to the live page here. And this week we are talking about working in the round, knitting in the round. And it's not just ribbing in the round, which we are going to talk about, but we're going to talk about working in the round in general, because that's something that is really different from crochet. I think when you want to do something in the round and crochet, I mean, it's pretty intuitive. You just kind of join and start working in the round. It's similar in knitting, but you need different tools to do it. It's not just, you can't just keep doing it with your crochet hook. So we're going to talk about what you need to do to begin working in the round and how you do work in the round and how does that change the instructions as opposed to working flat. So we're going to talk about all of that. Let me pull this up real quick. YouTube is showing that I have another one coming up soon. Another video coming up. I'm just like, no, that was one you didn't let me connect. Anyways, okay, so I have the chats open. We have a lot of lovely people here, very familiar faces. It's so nice to see so many of you in here. Hi, Laura and Barb, Linda and Jennifer and Shannon and Laura and Gail and Donna and Cindy, and certainly Creative and Julie Funk and Heather and Jacqueline. Oh my gosh, so many of you. I'm going to ask a question to the chat room. How many of you here are actively participating in the BiCrafty Bootcamp? And if you are, how are you finding it? What is something that you are surprised about in this whole process? Maybe you thought, I'm going to try it. I'm like, if anybody can teach me how to knit, it's going to be Marley. And maybe you're just like, oh, this is really working. This is great. Or maybe you're like, I just solidified that I don't like to knit. And that's perfectly valid. Totally valid. There are people who just don't want to knit, don't like to knit, and you don't have to knit. Like, it's just like knitters who don't want to crochet. I totally understand it, but I'd love to know what you guys are thinking out there as you're participating in this. So yeah, there's all of that. Oh my gosh. It's so nice to have both of you on here today. This is lovely. And obviously this is not our regularly scheduled time because, my life is a bit nuts with track, and it just seemed like it was a little easier to get it done during the day with this. So that actually might be a permanent change. It seems a little bit easier for all the way around. Catherine, I am going to say I'm loving the things on your wall behind you, like, because usually you're in your kitchen.
I'm in my living room today, so that's my mandala wall. Those are all crocheted
Love it.
mandalas. And my puppy, my troublemaking puppy, is over there somewhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I have a little color in my space.
Hey, I love it. I love it.
Sometimes I had made all the blankets, I'd made all the scarves, I'd given gifts to everyone. I needed to do something else. So I made a wall of crochet art.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. All right, so I'm trying to pull up this week's lesson because if you guys don't already know, Catherine is fantastic about putting up each lesson each week. So she's the one that goes in there, types it all up, gets input from us, and then heads out. As you can tell, the parts that I'm supposed to do are always late. And it just is what it is, y'all. It just is what it is. I do the best I can and I get to it when I can. So we'll just be working along together and we'll get there. Okay, so I'm gonna scroll through here. Actually, you know what, Catherine, why don't you kind of talk us through the highlights of today's post? You don't have to like read it verbatim or anything, but maybe just talk us through everything of what your goal was with the post today.
Right, and I've updated it so it's correct now. So we wanted to learn to knit in the round, like you said, and we wanted to do that building on the skills that we've already started. So last week we learned ribbing, we learned 2x2. This week we're going to learn 1x1 ribbing. So it seems I haven't done it yet, but I'm getting better. I need to say, for those of you who have joined bootcamp for a while now, I have finally mastered purl stitch. I can stockinette now. I'm not as
Woohoo!
behind to be, so you can do this. So it's time to learn to knit in the round, and we're going to start with the K1P1, and then we're going to go into seed stitch. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to make a cowl and we're going to make a matching hat. We're going to start with the cowl, and I think Marley will explain in a minute. We were trying to figure out how to use our different needles. We want to showcase lots of needles, as we said before, and we're moving into showcasing the Prim brand. And you need different size needles for a cowl, for a hat. So we're going to start with the cowl. We're going to learn K1P1. We're going to learn seed stitch. I think we're going to learn one more stitch pattern that we haven't decided on yet. And then we'll switch over to the hat. We'll do the same exact thing for the hat, except for that, we'll then get to learn shaping, and we'll get to learn working with DPNs at the end of the hat. So as the post explains, you're probably going to want to buy some more needles if you haven't bought sets yet. In the weeks coming up, you're going to want 16-inch and 24-inch size 8 5mm circulars. And you're also going to want size 8 DPNs when we get to the hat. So that's all in the post. It's all up there and ready to go. And keep your eye out later in the week. I haven't gotten our Xiaogu reviews yet, but I'm doing that either today or tomorrow, so you can see what we thought of all of their needles. We loved them. You saw us love them. So, and I think that's what Chrissy said she's giving away, is one of those today. So yeah, that's where we're at.
That's pretty awesome. I was on mute, surprisingly. So that's great. I'm looking over here at the chat. I don't know if you guys have seen these. People are excited to hear about the Prim needles and see how they work. As far as people participating in the boot camp, they're loving it. It says hands up here. Thought it would be too difficult, so she never tried to knit. This is Laura, and it says not as hard as I thought it would be. Marley is a fantastic teacher, of course. No. I'm participating. Thank you so much for getting me over the Purl frustration hump. Girl, the Purl frustration hump is real. Like, I even had it. So I totally understand.
Yes.
Completely. Shannon is actively participating, surprised that it's not as intimidating if you understand the stitches. I can agree with that. Whisper SDI says solidified that I can knit. I had not knit in over 20 years, as she prefers to crochet, or he prefers to crochet. I'm not sure, but fantastic. This is so great. Julie says the boot camp came along at the best time. There's another person here I read earlier. Oh, Donna says I'm having placemats in the making. So she has placemats in the making. So not only does she have the awesome mug rugs, I don't know if you guys can see mine. Like, I did a knit, like an all garter one, and I did the stripe one. Aren't they pretty? I blocked them and everything.
I love those
and then
colors.
we have the awesome coffee cuff. I don't know if you guys all caught that in last week's lesson. So much fun to do. Somebody else here was saying that they loved the coffee cup lesson. It was just, I mean, it's just very easy. It's a very easy thing to do. And I love when we're doing these classes, the sense of instant gratification you can get. I'm not sure why.
My coffee cuff is a hot mess. A lot of you probably saw my post. So I think it was just a case of distracted knitting. There's a couple spots where I goofed big time, and you could see where I goofed, but the best part about it was I knew exactly what I did, and I knew how to not do it again. Awesome. That's the point of homework. Like I said in my post, the point of homework is not for our homework to be perfect, but it's to learn and to show those skills and to I can read my knitting now. That's so exciting to me to know that I can tell exactly what I did, where I did it, and how to avoid doing it in the future. So
right. And that's huge. Like, there are so many like experienced knitters or longtime knitters. I'm trying to fix my microphone so it's like actually like in my face. All right. Is that better? Is my sound better if I do that?
Yes, actually it is.
Okay, good. There are so many people who've been knitting for a long period of time who do not know how to read their knitting. They have no idea. So if they make a mistake, they rely on ripping out their work and either having a lifeline put in or just pray that they get all the stitches picked up again, because they just don't know how to do it. Right. So I think the whole idea of reading your knitting and teaching people how to read their knitting is so liberating. And I think that's what allows people to still maintain the whole excitement about knitting when they can actually understand the mistakes they're making. Because otherwise you're just on a wing and a prayer, right? You're going out there and you're just like, I hope I don't drop a stitch, you know, where if you have the knowledge of, if I drop a stitch, that's all right, I get to use my crochet hook and pick it up. It's not as scary.
It also makes a really good wrist warmer.
Wrist warmer. That's a good idea. I should make these
really cool.
Make these for the track team. That's hilarious.
There you go. Think of it like these.
I know. So my plan is to put together a beginner boot camp kit, essentially, of all the patterns that we've done thus far. So I'm going to include the original one we did where it was all one color. And which I realized I use a size 9 on this, so I have to remake it because it's like massive. So we're going to have one with all one color, the stripes one, and then we'll have the garter stitch one and the coffee cozy cuff. So that way, if you guys wanted to have everything all in one kit, it'll all be available to you. So that is going to be coming up, which is lovely. So part of the discussion with all of us was, you know, what do we do the next step? Do we keep making mug rugs? Do we make more cozies? Like, what do we do? Well, in the years that I taught beginner knitting, I often would start off with little bits like this. And then we immediately jumped into learning to work in the round because you've got the basic knowledge right now, right? Like you could take everything you've done right now. If you guys did not continue with BiCrafty Bootcamp, you could have a successful knitting career. Like there's not a whole lot more that you absolutely have to know. But I feel like once you have this setup of working back and forth, understanding how to change colors, which coincidentally helps you how to add a new ball of yarn. We've talked about how to weave in your ends. We've talked about how to whip stitch something together, which at the end of the day, you could do that for everything you want. You don't have to do the other types of joins, but there are other joins out there that make things a little bit more pretty. You could be a good knitter. But I love the idea of taking these skills and now let's take it a step further and learn how to work in the round. So I'm going to talk specifically now of working in the round for knitting as it is a sister to working in the round in crochet. So that way you guys can hopefully understand like one versus the other. Does that sound like a good plan? All right, cool. So I'm going to make it so that it is all on me. It's all about me today, ladies. It's all on me now. Hopefully that's the view everybody is seeing. La la. Okay, so when you work in the round in crochet, how many of you have, you know, read the instructions, chain, you know, it could be chain 4 chains and then start putting a double crochet in the 4th chain from hook and like, you know, 5 other double crochets in there. And then all of a sudden you have like this work in the round, right? Like you have that where it's join with the slip stitch and then you chain 2 to go to the next level and you carry on with whatever it may be. You guys understand what I'm saying, right? And then there's the kind where it's chain X number of stitches, like maybe it's chain 90 stitches, join to the first chain with a slip stitch to work in the round. And then maybe you chain 2 and then work into all the chains all the way around, join with the slip stitch and then chain 2 to work on the stitches all top of there, right? We all understand the whole idea of the beginning chains or the standing stitches or the stack stitches to make that next round or next row the same height as the previous row, right? Because when we crochet, all of our stitches are different heights. Well, when we knit, all of our stitches are the same height, right? Like we aren't adding a bunch of different yarn over our hooks to work through to create different height stitches. They're all relatively the same height. So when we go from one row to the next row, just as we did in straight knitting, we didn't have to do anything extra. We just started knitting. The same thing holds true when we work in the round. So when we join to work in the round, we will just begin working in the round. Now, here's the funny thing. The first time I ever came across a pattern where it told me to cast on X number of stitches and then join to work in the round, I spent an hour of my life trying to figure out how to join. Because I come from the crochet background of, well, do you join with a slip stitch? Do I join where I remove the hook, put my hook in like from the back way to pull the hook, like the loop through? Like, how do I join to work in the, what does that mean? Like, I was super duper frustrated, right? And this is before YouTube. So all of you out there like, oh, why don't you just go check you before YouTube? Like YouTube was just like people on roller skates, just home videos. Okay. It was not this. And I finally came across a book that I had in my library. Because I mean, I told you guys once I learned to knit, I bought all the books, and it was something as simple as when you join to work in the round, simply just start working in the round. I was like, what do you mean? Just start working in the round? Well, in essence, you literally will take your stitches. So they're all on this circular needle and you come back to the first stitch you cast on, which would be your slip knot if you're doing it with that way, and you just start knitting into it. And yes, that gives you just a little bit of a jagged at the join, but you use your tail to weave that in and it closes it up. It's literally that easy. Now, are there other ways since then, since learning that, you know, first off, when I learned that, I was like, well, duh. Like, are you serious? I just spent an hour of my life trying to figure it out. And it's just that, just do it. Like, really? And so, so that's the first thing. Then as I became more and more advanced in knitting, I learned that there are some patterns that will have you actually cast on an extra stitch and essentially bind off a stitch to have a join. And then there are other patterns that, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to join to work in the round. But for the most part, guys, I'll tell you this, every single pattern I have, it's just start knitting. Just, you know, pull a Nike on it. Just do it. Just start knitting. And so that's really the first thing. We don't have to do a slip stitch or anything like that to begin working in the round. Now, the other thing that's different between knitting and crochet when you're working in the round is when we crochet, right, we just chain, and then join, and then we just keep, like, we're all doing it with the same hook. We don't have to change hook sizes. We don't have to do anything special. We don't have to pull out some Tunisian hook, like nothing, right? We just start using our same hook. And if you haven't picked up on this yet, that's because as you're crocheting, every stitch you make in crochet, you're binding off that stitch as you make it. In knitting, you're keeping them all live. They're all alive the full time. It's like you're not doing that last yarn over and pull through to finish your crochet stitch. They're all live. They're all live stitches all the way around. So when we do that, we have to have a cord or a long needle when you're working in the round, or a bunch of different needles to make it so that way the stitches have a place to go and be held until it's time to work into them again. So when we worked flat, we talked about using our circulars as straights. And all that meant was, hey, it was like we had two needles, they just happened to be joined at the bottom, right? Well, if we didn't use them as straights, if we use them as circulars, they just become a circle, right? You cast on enough stitches to where you can fill up the circle so that they aren't overly stretched. And then you join to work in the round, just do it. And you just start knitting right on top of those stitches. It's really that easy. The trick here though, is, as I said, you have to fill up the circle with enough stitches so that they aren't overly stretched. These circular needles come in different lengths for that reason. So you'll have the needles that are, hold on. Oh, if I can pull this over. Do I have them in here? Okay. So you'll have the needles that are like this, right? That are really small. I think these are like 10-inch needles, right? So, but they are circular needles. And then you'll have needles that are 16-inch. And then you'll have needles that are 24-inch and needles that are 32-inch and so on and so forth. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that size is determined by the tip to tip length. So it's not that the cord is 32 inches. It's that from tip to tip, it's 32 inches. And that's very important as we progress to some other needle companies out there. We're going to talk about the different lengths of needles. But when you are measuring your needles to figure out how long they are, if you're talking about circulars, you're measuring from tip to tip. And that length, that circumference, if you're working in the round, you want it to be smaller than the circumference of your finished project. So those of you who don't know, most head sizes are anywhere from 20 inches to 22 inches on the average. All right. You get some out there that are 24 inches, and, you know, babies are anywhere from 16 to 20 inches, right? I mean, mothers out there know, like, you look at a baby's head, you're like, dang, like, how did I do that? Right? Like, maybe I'm the only one. That was my initial reaction. But the thing here is that we want the circumference of your needles that you're going to work in the round to be smaller than the total circumference of what you're going to make. So having said that, when you make a hat, more often than not, you're going to want to have a set of 16-inch circular needles if you want to use circular needles, or you're going to have some double pointed needles. Oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. So you want to have double pointed needles. And the way these double pointed needles work is we will put the stitches on them, and it's as if the needle was a straight needle and we broke it in points so that way we can make it go in the round. And I'll explain that more as I'm demonstrating with it.
Marley,
go ahead.
Really quick, since it's relevant right now, someone had asked when they go to buy their DPNs for when it comes time to get our hat, what length are they going to need?
So I would say anywhere from 6" to 8". Yeah, 6" to 8". We're going to be using the 8" ones, but 6" to 8" are good ones to go by. Anything smaller, you might not be able to get all your stitches on there, and that you'll understand what I mean with that as we keep going. The whole point of this is to say, when you work in the round in knitting, it's very important that you then have a variety of needles available to you in different lengths. That's where when we talk about convertibles or interchangeables or fixed needles, they all have a different benefit all the way around, right? Prim needles, they come in fixed needles, and they're also ergonomic. So we're going to talk about them specifically in this series of videos. But it's the most important here is that you need to understand that when you buy the needles, you need to have the correct length. So as we're making the cowl to start, we're going to use the 24" length needles, because 24 inches is a good generic size. Like if you wanted to go out and buy all the Prim needles, which, great, go do it, because they're pretty great. Get the 24" and the 32". Just get all the sets, get all the different sizes. Then you have them available to you. Don't worry, we will show you how to store them. We have plans, lots and lots of plans. But while you're at it, the best thing to do as far as building up your guys' knitting toolbox, make sure you get the double points to go with those. Get the different sizes of double points, so that way as you're making hats, you can transfer from the circulars to the double points. Because think about this, at some point when we start shaping the top of a hat, the circumference is going to be smaller than the 16" circulars. So we have to use something smaller, which is where double points come in handy. Now, having said all of that, you guys, we could start the entire project on DPNs and just continue throughout. That's the way it was done for many, 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 many years, right? Circular needles are a relatively new tool in knitting. And the crazy thing is, it is the most common tool now for actual knitters. I know very few knitters that are strictly straight needle knitters. Like almost everybody I know uses circulars as straights or circulars as circulars, and then double points. I mean, double points are cool. They're still my favorite, but they're actually extra tools out there. So if you are anything like me, and part of your whole adventure into the knitting world is so that you can get all the things, because that was me. The first time I knew to knit, I was at the store and I was super excited that I no longer had to seclude myself to this little patch of crochet accessories, because I was like, knitting has all the cool stuff. Like, what is this? And so then I learned to knit and I bought all the knitting things. So the great thing here is that you're going to have so many needles, but the explanation here is that I need these needles because each length is going to allow me to make different items. Like maybe you need the 16" for hats, 24" for cowls or the neckline of a sweater, 32" for the body of a sweater, DPNs for the top of a hat and sleeves, maybe a 60" so that way you could do a big coat in the round or a blanket, working it as straight but working as a blanket where it's all on 60" a 60" needle. Like these are all necessary tools that you will ultimately need. All right. Is that a good enough explanation, ladies? You guys need to tell me how I'm doing.
No, that's very good. Very good.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
Good. And then I won't have any of you out there struggling to figure out how to join to work in the round and knitting, because you'll know exactly how to do it. Just pull a Nike. Just do it.
Just do it.
All right. So I'm going to turn on my camera to my hands. It says that I disabled my own video. Asked to start video. The host has asked you to start your video. Okay, started my video. How weird is that? It's so strange. Okay, so if you guys can see down here, I'm going to keep it on gallery view for the moment since we're not doing anything super, super intense. I showed you these earlier. So these things here, if you were to pick these up, they say yoga cable stitch needles, right? So you can use these as a cable needle, which we will learn how to cable here sooner rather than later. But you could probably use these even as a like a small circular needle to do like a sleeve or something. Okay. But different needle companies do have really small needles such as this. So that way people who are just so opposed to double points have a smaller option. Okay. I will tell you with my big hands, I struggle with these smaller needles, but it's a personal preference thing, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about this. Let me move those. Okay, so right here we have the Prim ergonomics. These are pretty fantastic. Let me move this. I was first introduced to Prim, gosh, it was years ago. And let me change my audio. Let me make sure. Can you guys still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, am I double? Am I good?
No, you're good.
All right, cool. Let's see here. So hopefully you're seeing my hands. All right. So the Prim needles, I was introduced to these years ago, different types of needles. And then over the years, like their packaging has changed, the type of needles have changed. And I went to the store and I saw some double points. I didn't even know these existed, right? I saw the double points and I was like, oh, those are great. They come in a larger size double point because at the time I needed that. And I didn't have any. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get them. And I bought them and I was very pleased with them. But I'm not going to lie, when I first pulled them out, I was like, what is this? They look like drumsticks, right? Like that was my first reaction. I was like, they look like drumsticks. I was like, how are these going to work? Well, the great thing is when I used them for the first time, I was very happy with how light they were. And I was very happy with this little bump here, which I was shocked by. I didn't think I would like that at all. But there was something making it very easy to grab my yarn to pull it through. And as crocheters, you guys can understand this. When you first started knitting, it was probably a little tricky when you would go into the stitch, yarn over, and then pull that yarn through the stitch. Like, did your yarn keep falling off the tip there? These make it so that it grabs it just a little bit because it just has that little indentation. That was it, you know, which is great, especially when you're using double points because you're already super stressed out when you're using them. And it just makes it really easy. I don't know if you can tell here, but can you see that they are like triangle, like there are three sides. There's a side here, a side here, and a side here. So they're not just round. So there's something to grip onto. You see that? Which makes it easier for the hand to hang on to. This here is just paint. It's not an actual grip, just so you guys can see. I do like that they have the size of the needle etched in. It's not etched in, it's just right there. I like that I can find it very easily on all of them. This is the 8-inch needle. It's comfortable in my hand. I have big hands, so it doesn't poke me down here like the smaller needles do. And it was very comfortable. It was a very nice knit. So I was like, well, this is pretty awesome. So when Prim contacted me and they were like, hey, we'd like to send you some of our circulars, I was like, well, heck yes, send them away because I would love to try them. And I have been happy with those as well. So I'm going to just pop those right there. We're going to go back to them. So the circulars, I pulled out the size 7 circular and the size 8 circular, and we're going to talk about the two different sizes here in a minute, but let's pull out the size 7 to start. The packaging is very nice. And let's talk about the cord. This cord, is it like coated metal? I want to say the right thing. It feels like coated. Yeah, a steel cord. So those of you who got some of the more inexpensive cords out there from the different stores and your cord was made out of plastic, it was kinking up on you or coiling around or bent, or it was just like so annoying. These steel cords tend to keep their shape and they're just, look how pliable it is, and just makes a more enjoyable knit. Now the cord does not swivel, so it is stationary to the actual needle. I like that. I think they feel really good. They have a nice taper from the needle down to the cord. Okay, so there isn't like an abrupt join. And that's good because you don't want an abrupt join there because it will snag your yarn. You guys with me on that? So it's a very nice join. These here also have the 3 sides. Okay, so there's the 3 side. It's a triangle shape. And they have the nice little dip in the tip, which they do call a hook tip. Perfect for crocheters, right? It just gives you that little bit. Now, here's the 24-inch, right? You might be like, wow, that looks kind of small, Marley. It looks like I can make a hat out of that. Well, the trick here is, guys, once you get all the stitches on here to actually fill up so that you could, because remember, we're going to work in the round. So you have to be able to have this last stitch reach the first stitch as you cast on. And so if you don't have enough stitches to fill this up, they're going to be tight. They're going to get stretches. It just doesn't look good. But if we made a hat that could get onto a 24-inch circular needle, the hat would be so big it would just fall down over our face. So that's why we would need 16-inch to make a hat. But 24-inch will be perfect for a cowl because we can get enough stitches on there to be at least 24 inches, but ours will be a little bit bigger for the cowl. You want a cowl to be a little bit bigger. You guys with me so far? Now, the importance of DPNs as opposed to circulars is this. So circular needles, when we were using them as straights, we just turned our work back and forth, right? They just happened to be joined down here, but we disregarded the fact it was joined. We just used them as straight needles, made it so that way we didn't drop a needle and had to go searching for it, right? But if we're going to use them as circulars, we need to make sure that all of our stitches match up. So the benefit of double points versus a circular is, say you don't have a 16-inch circular, but you need to make a hat. Well, you could use double points from the start. And the way this works is if we put these double points and made them as if they were taking the place of the cord and the needles, let me put this on here. Can you see how now I have this needle that represents this one, this needle that represents this one, this needle that represents this portion of the cord, this needle that represents this portion of the cord. So it's a square, but it's a circle. You know what I mean? You see this?
Yeah.
So we have different break points. There's a break point here, a break point here, break point here, break point here. If I had a whole nother set of these needles, I could even add more. Like, I doesn't just have to have 4. Or say you have a set that only has 3, it would be like this, where you have a triangle, where this needle here represents everything that would be on the cord down here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now you might be saying, well, what about those other needles? Why do you have those? Well, here's why. I'm going to go back. First off, these break points, when you're working with double points, are super important. It's been my experience, the more break points you have in your work when you're working in the round, the less stress you're putting on the stitches as it goes from one needle to the next, and you don't get ladders. So as you go along, we'll learn about ladders. Looks like a run in your pantyhose. So the more break points you have, the less stress you have on your knitting, and it allows your knitting to be a little bit more uniform. But these needles represent just holding stitches. So when I said this needle represented that one, it actually doesn't. This needle here represents the needle that would be in your right hand. This needle is just holding stitches like the other two. So this one, and this one are just holding stitches. This needle would be the one in my left hand that I'd be working off of, and I'd be working onto this needle. So all the stitches from this one would eventually go onto this one. And when that happens, this one will become empty. This one will have stitches on it. And so we would rotate, you rotate your work so that the needles would eventually, you put them around, they would rotate. So you bring the next one in. So then your stitches onto this, the needles get onto here. So then you rotate, everything comes around, and your spare needle becomes the one that goes in your right hand. So that's how these straight needles, these straight double points, which means there's a point at either end, right? That's how they are used as straights. Is that understandable? Like, am I explaining myself well enough?
Yeah. And honestly, that was really helpful because I always thought, well, how do you knit with just those 2 little ends right there? Like, aren't things going to fall off the other side?
Right.
So I never understood why there were so many of them and how you actually got that to coordinate. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So like
very
right here,
helpful.
I mean, these are not prim needles, but I was working on something else, but these are in the round right here. You can see they're just holding stitches. And so here's my 5th needle to begin knitting off of this one. And then it'll just work around. So if you imagine these all on a cord, that's essentially what's happening.
Yep. Yeah.
That's how it works out.
Sense.
So that's why it's important that you have circulars, and double points. Now, yes, there's a thing called magic loop. We'll talk about that later on, but this is what we need to know for the basics of everything. Okay. So for our project, you'll notice that we put down there either size 7 circulars or size 8 circulars. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit. You guys good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So when you're working on a hat, or if you're making something where you want the ribbing to be a little bit tighter, you typically will use a smaller needle. So even right here, let me move this aside. So these are the same length needle, but 2 different sizes, right? The 7s and the 8s. So let's say let's pretend I was making, well, let's not pretend. I'm making a cowl, but I want the ribbing portion of my cowl just to be a little bit tighter than my knit stitches. I would use a size 7. And then once my ribbing is done, I transfer over to the size 8. And it's really easy to transfer. You don't have to sit there and slip 1 stitch to the needle each time all the way around. You actually will just drop this needle right here. So like if all your stitches are on here, and you're knitting around, you're like, okay, it's time to use my 8s. You will drop this needle, pick up your size 8 needle in your right hand, and start knitting onto your size 8 needle, because the size of the stitches are determined by the needle you are using to knit them with, not knit them off. That's why if you ever need to put a needle in to save stitches, like lower in a project, use a really small needle to easily get into the stitches, and then use the needle you're using to actually knit with, to knit them off the smaller needle, and nothing will be changed because you're knitting them with the correct size. It doesn't matter what you're knitting off. It matters what you're knitting onto. You got that? That's a quote. Your stitches are determined. The size of your stitches are determined by the needle you're knitting onto, not the needle you're knitting off of. Okay?
Okay. That makes
Got
sense.
it? Whew. Does that explain enough about the tools that we will need for working in the round? I'm going to go back and ask you guys, and what does the chat room say? So I'm going to take some water.
Seems to make sense. We're mostly talking in the chat about, well, we're talking about a lot of different stuff, but the relevant stuff that we're talking about is everyone's kind of curious about the material that the prims are made of, because they're kind of in between the metal and bamboo. And we're talking about the shape and how we feel like that's going to be really good for learning how to work in the round, especially when we get to those DPNs.
Oh, Marley, you're muted. I don't know how that happened.
It's because I muted my actual microphone because I tried to double mute myself. Am I good now?
Yes.
Okay. So on here, it says, you're going to get 5 double pointed needles. And you get high performance. They're made with high performance synthetic material. They're very smooth, and they don't grab at my yarn like other plastic needles. Like, I don't know if these are plastic. It just says synthetic material, but they feel really good. Like they feel, and I would be honest with you guys, like there are plastic needles out there, like actual plastic I cannot stand them. The hook type tip that we were talking about, that makes it super easy to pick up the stitches. And the triangle shape, it says allow stitches to slide freely along the needle, which I could totally see that, but it feels really good in my hand too. Like I like the way it feels. And it says these are made in Germany, you guys. So I don't know if that answers the questions there. They feel good. Like they don't grab my yarn. When I was using them on the other project, you guys remember the this or that knit along I did last year? I used the Prim Dpns to work on one of the pieces of that. And my hands never got like super sweaty as I was working with them, which typically is what happens when I'm using a synthetic material sort of needle. My hands did not get super sweaty. They just felt really good. So that was one of the reasons I did want to highlight them in this series, because I feel like they're just one of those needles that not many people know about them. And so I think it's important that you learn about them. But yeah, that's that. What other questions, Catherine?
There was one that just popped up from Valerie. She asked, do you have to put markers in 4 places if you see a pattern for DPNs but are using a circular?
No.
Right.
Yes and no. If the pattern is written in such a way that it says knit to the end of the needle, knit two together, you have to know where the end of the needle would be on your circulars. So then you would have to add a stitch marker. But for the most part, not typically. It's only if the pattern is written in such a way that the designer tells you exactly how many stitches you need to have on each needle and tells you work to the last 2 stitches of the needle, knit 2 together, go to the next needle, work to the last 2 stitches of the needle, because you have to know what that number is, where she or he has written it in such a way that they expect you to already know that, but that's how you would have to do that. Okay. Any other questions?
No, I don't think so. People are asking where to buy Prim, and I've dropped their website in the chat.
Cool.
And you can find them elsewhere online.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think right
so
now.
if you guys caught up on that, I did mention that the more breakpoints you have in your needles, if you're using double points, the better. So because I mean, I'm not ignorant. I know not everybody's going to go out and get Prim, or not everybody's going to go out and buy all the different needles that we suggest. So you're going to look at other needles. There are some needles out there that double points and they come in sets of 4. And you might be like, well, Marley says that 5 is better to have more points. You're just going to have to buy 2 sets. So that way you can have the 5th needle. Like, can you use, and can you use 4 needles instead of 5? Yes, you can. But I will tell you, I find it so much easier to use 5 needles over 4 because you have more breakpoints. And you guys, I just showed you that it's not a matter of, oh my gosh, I have more needles. It's that you just have more needles holding stitches. They're not doing anything else. You're not actually knitting with 5 needles. Now, nobody else knows that. So as you go and knit in public, you look really freaking awesome, because it's like, look at that lady. She has 5 needles happening over there. She must be some sort of a master knitter. And you'd be like, yeah, that's right. Marley Bird taught me. So, yeah, I love these Prim needles. And if you guys do order the Prim needles, make sure you share about it on social media. Tag them on Instagram or on Facebook and let them know you heard about them here. Like, that's really important that they know that we're talking about them, in the good way, because they're pretty awesome needles. All right. So that is a really great explanation about circulars and double points and how to work circularly with your knitting, if I do say so myself. But how about we actually cast on some stitches and get something started here? Does that sound like a good plan? And the gallery says, yes, Marley. Yes.
I wish we could hear everyone, don't you?
I hear everybody. They're like, stop gabbing, lady. Just get to it. But you know what? These are things that, like, I wish I knew. I wish I knew this stuff. I didn't know this. I just jumped in. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to cast on stitches onto my size 7 needles. Okay. You can cast on a size 8. It doesn't really matter, whatever works for you. Okay. And we're still going to use, I just lost my train of thought. We're still going to use a long tail cast on. It makes it very easy to use. And you're going to see that as we cast on the stitches, as they keep continuing to be made, they're just going to move down into the cable, just like we did when we were working as straights. All right. So I went into my back room and I grabbed some purple Chic Sheep. So this colorway is called Vineyard. It's one of my favorite colorways. Sadly, Chic Sheep is going to be going away. So if you get a chance to get any from yarnspirations.com, please use our link to get it. But yeah, it's pretty awesome stuff, y'all. Don't miss out. It's really good yarn. It's not going away because it's poopy yarn.
I know. It is awesome.
It's really bad that it's going away. It stinks. Okay. So just like any project, when we do long tail cast on, we want to make sure that our tail is long enough for our cast on. And for this particular cowl, we do know that we want it at least 24 inches, right? So I when I make cowls, I like to have them about 30 inches. So 30 inches in circumference. So I'm just going to kind of guesstimate, and I'm just going to kind of go like that. All right. And then I'm just going to make sure that I can do that 3 times. And if I could do that 3 times with a little bit of extra, in theory, that should give me enough tail to cast on the number of stitches I want. Okay. So I've done that. At this point, this is where I'm going to put my slip knot. You guys all know how to do a slip knot. We're going to grab our needles and put your slip knot directly onto your needle. I'm going to go ahead and make this so it's speaker view. All right, can you all hear me? All right, go into my hands. Just like before, you have the tail of the yarn. I make that over my thumb. Working yarn will go over my fingers. So position your hands for the long tail cast on and begin to do the long tail cast on. And because we're going to be doing so many stitches, I am going to place a stitch marker after 20 stitches because it helps me count. And I just find it so much easier. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Grab a stitch marker. I like long nails, but can I just tell you, they make them really difficult to grab things.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to keep going.
I'm going to grab a stitch marker.
Just going to keep going here. I can't find the one I want. There it is. As you can see, as I keep going here and I get the stitches start to cram up on my needle, I gradually just start pushing them down. So sorry. I put this on Do Not Disturb, and of course, I get a phone call.
Of course you were disturbed.
I know. All right, so 20.
Okay, Catherine, while we're casting on, since we have a minute, why don't you give me the name of the person who commented at, let's see, it's 1:19, so almost an hour in. Let's see who commented at 12:57. Do we have any comments from 12:57?
I
don't think you can tell what time.
I don't know how to find the time on there.
Oh, you can't find the time.
Here's what I would do, Chrissy. I would give them a keyword to type in right now, and
Okay,
then
perfect.
just randomly pick somebody from the keyword.
Okay. The keyword we're going to have you type in right now is DPN. That's your keyword, DPN. So start commenting, and then I'll just say stop, and we'll pick whoever commented last when we say stop. Catherine, you're watching them like a hawk, right?
I'm watching like a hawk. It's probably going to take them a minute to catch up with us. It's slightly delayed.
Yep. So it's totally dependent on who Catherine sees. So
Yeah.
it might look different on somebody else's screen, but it's all up to Catherine.
Okay, so
Yes,
they've started. So.
remember that there's a delay, folks. So you may see a different name at the exact time that we see it. It's all up to what Catherine sees. She's got no horse in the race. So
No, I want everybody to win. I wish we could
innocently, yes. I wish I could give it to everyone. So while we're waiting for a second.
So it's going now. So whenever you're ready to just call it, you tell me and I'll see who I saw.
Okay. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Let some more come in. Are there a lot coming in?
There's a lot coming in. People want these Chow Goo needles.
All right. Now.
Rebecca Cooper, I think it is. Rebecca Cooper is our winner.
Rebecca Cooper. Rebecca, I'm going to show you how exciting this little giveaway is here. So first, you've got your little Chow Goo project bag. So cute. It's a little backpack. It's where all my Chow Goos are right now. And you'll get a little catalog, which these you can't get unless Chow Goo sends them to you directly. So this isn't something that people can just grab. So this is awesome because it shows you everything that they have. There is crochet and knitting stuff in here. And you're getting a set of Spin Bamboo small set 4-inch. So this is the smaller version. This doesn't have all the needles, but this has, I believe, sizes, 2 through 8. And this little case. So Rebecca, this is going to you. I want you to email me. And Catherine, you might want to write this as a comment to her, but email me at contact@marleybird.com so I can get your info and we'll get that mailed out to you. Awesome. I'm so excited.
That's great.
Oh, me too.
All right.
This is so fun. I love how much people gave us.
I know. And I love giving stuff away.
I know. I can't wait till we can give away some of the prims. I think people will be so excited.
Yes.
All right. So I cast on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times 20 is anybody?
140.
Bueller? Yes, 140. Okay. So here we go. Here's the first thing. So I am going to put a stitch marker right here at the very end, and it's going to want to fall off, but we'll save it here. The first thing we want to make sure when we join to work in the round, and you'll often see something say this, is join to work in the round, be careful not to twist. So the reason I like to use the long tail cast on, as you guys know, you get a really nice, right? You get a really nice finish, but on the inside, remember, it has that purl bump, right? You see that purl bump? So what we want to do is you want to maintain control of your needles. I'm just holding my needles, but I want to make sure that I don't see any twist at any point of the cord to where my work is twisted around. So like right here, I want to make sure that that's straight. Everything stays nice and straight so that there's no twist. Does that make sense? So ultimately, if I were to set this down, I want to make sure that my pearls are all on the inside of my work. So I'm going to set this down here. And I'm going to make sure all my pearls are on the inside. See what I mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to say that, of course, it's different in crochet, but I think the fact that we know how to join in the round in crochet, we understand that concept of you don't want it. We understand why you don't want it twisted.
Right, right. So this is the best way to make sure of it is I set it down and I make sure all my pearls are on the inside. Now, this is very important. When you're knitting, you always want to make sure, as I pick this up and I'm looking at it, I want the front of my fabric to always be facing me. If I pick it up and essentially if my needles are over here and my cord with all my stitches are over here and I'm knitting along and I'm looking at the wrong side right here, I'm knitting inside out, which is very, very common. A lot of people will accidentally do it because they just don't know. So the way you have to visualize this is, so I set my knitting needles down like this on purpose because the knitting needles are facing me. I have the pearls on the inside and on that, which that means that my knits are on the outside, right? So when I pick up my knitting here, my ultimate goal is for me to still see my knitting on the outside and keep my purls on the inside. So you saw here, I just moved my yarn. So my yarn is coming from the inside, right? So behind my needles. So it's out of the way. So it's not tucked into my cord anywhere. And what we're going to do is this yarn is coming from that stitch over here. And we're going to knit into this stitch over here to create that join. This is just like if this loop was on our hook and we were joining with a slip stitch to this to make a join. You guys all with me on that? Only we're just going to start knitting. So get your yarn. As you come to these stitch markers, these ones, you can take them off. I purely use them just to count because it just makes it easier. But you do not remove the one that you have here at the beginning because it represents the beginning of your round. You need to make sure you keep that. Okay? All right, so I'm going to grab my knitting needles. I'm going to pick them up just like this. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to twist anything in here. As you're going along, you need to make sure you have your stitches over here pushed up onto your right needle, okay? Or no, I apologize. Make sure they're pushed up enough to where they're not getting overly stretched just to begin, you know, because we're moving from this to this. And then these ones, as you work them, you're going to gradually just move the stitches up the needle so you can get to them. So you're going to see what I mean. So I'm grasping my needles just like we've done all along, only now our yarn is going to come from here. So I go into the stitch, just like I've done before, yarn over, just like I've done before, pull that stitch out. And before I jump off, I'm giving it a good pull to make that join nice and snug. And then I'm going to let that jump off. Then I'm going to do the same to the next one. Before I jump off, I give it a pull and jump off. All right. So that was a knit 2. If you are jumping directly into ribbing, we would do knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. When I do ribbing, I'm going to give you guys a little tip here. You don't have to do this by any means, but because the first round of working on double points or sometimes on circulars is just a little bit tricky, I tend to knit my whole first round and then jump into ribbing. It gives a little bit of a curl and it's just a little bit of a finish. You don't have to do it, but I like it. So I'm going to have you knit this entire first round before we do any purling. And so we're just going to go into each stitch all the way around and just knit. So as you're knitting and they're going to your right hand needle, you'll gradually push stitches up this cord onto your left hand needle. You've already been doing that if you've been using circulars. And then as they start to bunch up here, you start to move them down. Okay. It's just as if you had a crochet circle in your hand and you were rotating your work as you were making the stitches. Just going to knit this entire first round. Just pull them up, push them down, and just keep it comfortable. This is where you can really see how important it is to make sure you have enough stitches to get all the way around the circumference of the needles you're using. Now I'm just knitting. I mean, we're not doing anything different at this point. We've just joined our work. When I get to my stitch marker, I'm going to show you how to keep a stitch marker in your work if you wanted to. You come to it. You guys ready? This is really important. You ready? Boop. There you go.
I love the boop. There you go.
That's how easy it is. You literally just plop it over. So this stitch marker is not actually in your work. It's just resting on your needles. It's resting as a point in your work to say, hey, something's happening here. And for this example, it's just to say, hey, it's 20 stitches. So if I wanted to remove it, I just take it off and remove it. Can you see that? Not that you guys don't already know that you use stitch markers when we did the mug rugs, but you know, some of you might think it's different because we're in the round, but it's not. So as I'm just knitting around, I'm going to ask Catherine to answer or ask some of the questions or answer questions or whatever you think.
Before I jump into that, I'm distracted here and I'm trying to update the pattern on the website as you're typing, and I missed how many you casted on.
140.
140. Thank you.
And I put a stitch marker every 20 stitches to make it easier.
Perfect.
To count.
Thank you. Trying to get this all updated at the same time.
Dude, I like that.
I don't know. I don't see any questions yet. I think people are getting it. Yeah, you guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat and I will see what Marley has to say as she's knitting away here.
Yeah. Now you might ask, this join here at the beginning might look like it gets a little bit big. Don't stress it. Remember, I told you your tail, we can close that up later, but here at the beginning, we're not going to stress about it too much. We just want to get this first round knit. Just makes life easier, I think. Everybody's so quiet. They're either super quiet because they're mesmerized. They're super quiet because they're working on their own.
They might be mesmerized. I noticed you had put, if people haven't seen it yet, you had put a brief video of the K1P1 on Instagram, and so many people said they just enjoyed watching. Like, it was so soothing just to watch you stitch.
Oh, well, that's good because I have a couple more videos ready to go.
Awesome.
Yarnspirations actually asked me to do some more of those square videos for them. So that was my test introduction to see if I could do it.
Awesome. Yeah, people love it. I think you should do a whole series where people can just watch you knit. Let's see. Obviously this is going to be different for everyone, but someone's asking, how long do you typically spend knitting or crocheting, and how do you avoid eye strain?
So that really, it used to be that I would spend hours and hours, and I make a point of getting up at least every hour to stretch my hands and to stretch my legs. Cause if I don't, I get very stiff, and I'm just assuming that helps with my eyes because I've never had any problems with my eyes and eye strain. And then as I typically knit, I don't usually have to look at my work. I can knit without looking at it. For this though, like I have to look down and make sure I'm still in camera. So I have to look down quite a bit, but for the most part, I usually don't have to look at my knitting very much.
Yeah, I haven't had too much problem with eye strain either. I am taking the injury I had as well as the advice you gave last week and trying to stop very often to just kind of stretch and walk around and loosen my shoulders and flex my muscles. And
right.
Yeah.
As you're going, you'll see that I'm constantly just kind of checking to make sure that everything is still straight, that as I was knitting, I didn't accidentally twist something. Everything looks really good.
Ooh, we do have a smart question here, and you might cover it later, but Julie asks, as we move along, can you address how you would leave this project for the night to then pick up later?
There you go.
Oh,
just
perfect.
Let it go. The biggest thing to make note of is that when you pick it up, your yarn is going to be coming from your needle that's in your right hand, right? You don't want to pick it up and have the yarn over here. I mean, you can scooch them down your needle if you want, but you don't have to do anything special. You don't have to put a point protector on it or anything like that. Like you could. You guys have seen these point protectors. I bought these literally when I started knitting because I was like, oh, I gotta have them. I already told you. So you can buy these and they just make it so the stitches don't fall off. But I have quite literally never used them because I just don't find you need them. My Airlane bags, and put it aside and it's there waiting for me. If you don't have to do anything special, the biggest thing to remember, just like we talked about when we were talking about fixing mistakes and if you have to put your work down, is when you pick it up, make sure your yarn is coming off the needle in your right hand.
Someone's asking if we're going to show other ways of joining in the round. I assume maybe later on, maybe when we do the hat or another project.
We can, but there's really no need. Like really the only other way is like if you cast on an extra stitch, you would just knit one and have that stitch jump over and it would look like you were just binding off one stitch to make it join, but you really don't have to. Like you don't have to do anything different. Just start knitting.
And does Marley have any advice on advancing the stitches up the left needle quickly? I feel like I spend too much time pushing the stitches up.
Different needles will act differently for you. Like some needles will make it easier for you just to kind of, I don't know how to explain it. Like my 3 fingers here, I gradually just start to pull them up like this. Other ones, like these ones, you'll notice I have to stop and pull things up to get things where they need to be, like I get a bunch up there. And then as I'm knitting, you can see these 3 fingers are resting on my needle. And as I work, it's like I use my middle finger to push up these ones here at the tip. And then as I go, I'm using my thumb to push up the others. I don't know if that makes any sense. And that was purely just trial and error. Because I remember asking the same thing when I first started knitting. And my knitting teacher was like, you'll just learn how, like your body just starts to process it. And you'll get comfortable with understanding how many stitches you actually need up in action. And I will also say here at the beginning, right after a cast on, it's a little bit more stiff than once you get some fabric going. It'll be easier to move your stitches up. Like here at the beginning, it's just, you don't have much there. And if you cast on snug, they're going to be a little bit tighter than normal. But as you get going, the stitches become easier to move up your needle. So I'm almost here to the end. I'm going to show you. I know this is a lot of stitches, you guys. But honestly, these cowls, they're just nice to have. And you could think of this could be your first Christmas gift that you make if you don't wear cowls. It's just going to be a fun little stitch sampler cowl. It'll be comfortable. And if you wanted to change colors, you could for each section. All right, so I'm coming up to the end, and I know that because I put my turquoise marker there at the end, but I want to show you something. Not only that, but my tail is here. So I know that my tail represents the end of my knitting, right? It's wrapped around. Shouldn't be wrapped around that. There we go. So my tail represents the end of my knitting. So I know that I have this last stitch here. If I didn't have my marker there, that would be it. And you can see there's a little bit of a string there. I'm not going to stress about it because as I go on to the next step, it'll start to pull together. And I have this long tail to close up anything that might be ugly that I don't need. Like it's really that simple. So once I get my first knit round, you can see you get this little bit of this little tiny lip. I like it. I think it looks pretty. This is where I would jump into knit 1, purl 1, Ribby, which is very easy, very similar to the knit 2, purl 2. And it's very convenient for those of you who are doing continental because moving from knit and purl is as simple as that, right? That's the beauty of continental. So I knit my first stitch after my marker, bring my yarn between my needles, and I purl my next stitch. Between my needles, knit, between my needles, purl, between my needles, knit, between my needles, purl. I will tell you guys, using these needles, I find pulling the stitches through is actually, it's very easy with this little hook tip. This little thing that I was like, what is that? The first time I ever saw them. It makes it super easy because like, look, it just grabs at the yarn.
Yeah.
And it's just makes it someplace for it to rest and pull through. It's very, very nice. I wasn't sure if I'd like it because I like really pointy tip needles. But even with that little hook bit, it's a pointy needle. It's a pointy needle. All right. So if you forget where you are, it's like right here, I was talking to you guys. I didn't know if I did a knit or purl. Look at your right hand needle and we know how to read our knitting. So if the last stitch you did looks like a knit stitch, you know you're on a purl. If the last stitch you did was a purl, then you're on a knit. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So you will read your knitting from your right hand to know where you are. And you just keep doing this all the way around. Pretty easy. How are we feeling?
I'm pulling mine off.
You're pulling yourself. So I'm going to tell you guys why I like 1x1 ribbing. So I know a lot of people will do 2x2 ribbing or 2x3 ribbing. I like 1x1 ribbing because the knits look pretty identical to the purls. You don't get that one knit stitch that's really big and fat next to a really nice and tidy knit stitch without having to do a lot of extra fiddling with the purl. So I really like a knit one, purl one ribbing. Plus, as you're learning this, knit one, purl one ribbing can be done flat. And the fabric, when it's done and it's not spread out, it looks like stockinette. So it's a way to get a stockinette look without the curl. You know what I mean? If you're not stretching it out, it looks really good. I wonder if I don't think I have. I don't.
I'm only pulling mine off because I cast on way too tight.
Oh.
And I don't feel like fussing with it. So I'm just going to pull it off and start over.
There you go. But this is it, y'all. This is what we want to do. And we want to make this ribbing. I like to make my ribbing on a cowl at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches. If you want it bigger, you want it shorter, it's not going to make or break anything. So you just make this as long or as tall, I should say, as you like. I'm making mine 1.5 inches because I like that. I like it's a good size. So that's what we're going to do. And that's the homework.
Awesome sauce.
Right? Pretty easy.
Yeah, so much good information today, though. So many different things about DPNs, about how we just go for it, just do it. So much good stuff today. So many helpful tips that we wouldn't have even known to ask had you not gone over them. So they're good stuff. Good stuff. I'm excited.
Good. I'm excited to find out if you guys really like working in the round, if you like the knit one, purl one. I'm excited to find out how many of you get the prim needles and you like, oh, I like the hook tip part because that's really convenient, especially as crocheters. So that would be really good too. Let's see here. Crochet in Agreement says, I have found the knit one, purl one easier to count or remember. Same. I find it so much easier for sure. I don't know why that is. It's just such a simple little thing. Do you knit over your tail in the second round so you don't have to weave it in later? All right, Monica Ray. You know what? In crochet, I am not a fan of crocheting over my tails. In knitting, I don't do the whole like weave over your tail or knit over your tail at all because I find it easier to bury my ends at the end. I think it's just a prettier finish, especially when I'm dealing with thicker yarns. If I'm dealing with thinner yarns, I will do more of a weave type thing. I'll have to show you guys that in a different video. Like essentially I wrap my tail around my working yarn, knit a stitch, wrap my tail around my working yarn, knit a stitch, and it just weaves it around the active stitch. I don't tend to do it with thicker yarn because it shows more, but I like to bury my ends, and I like the whole process of finishing, so I don't do that, Monica. Plus, having that tail there is another just helpful tool to know where the beginning or the end of my round is for sure. Let's see here. What other questions do you see, Catherine?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. There was one more that I saw. Where was that? Oh, Angie just wanted to know why some patterns look different if you do it in the round than if you're doing the exact same thing flat.
That's a great question. Okay, so this is a very good question. When you are working in the round, let me come here. Okay, when you are working in the round, you know that when we were working flat, let me turn off that video. When we were working flat and we were knitting every row, we got garter stitch, right? And that's because when we turned our work, remember we were looking at purls and we were knitting on top of purls because the backside of a knit is a purl, right? When you're working in the round, you're always looking at the front of the stitch. So if you're knitting and you're always looking at knits and you're knitting on top of knits, you're going to get a stockinette fabric. So when we knit flat, in order to get stockinette, we knit a row and then purl a row and then knit a row and then purl a row. And we do that because when we knit our row and turn our work, we purl the row because we're looking at purls. We want our purls on top of purls, knits on top of knits, right? And that's what gives us our stockinette fabric. When you're working in the round, remember when I told you always want the right side of your fabric looking at you, and you're always like you're working those stitches. So if the right side of your fabric is knit and you're just knitting constantly, it's a giant spiral of just knits, you're going to get stockinette. So stockinette in the round is very easy because it's just knitting. You don't have to purl at all. That's one of the conveniences for people who like to make a sweater in the round, and it's like a stockinette sweater in the round, because they don't have to purl. They just knit the whole thing. It's just knitting the whole time. Knitting tends to be faster than purling, so that's the beauty of it. Does that answer your question? You really have to put it in your brain of the fact that when you are working in the round, if you're not actively turning your work, you are always looking at the right side of your fabric. So whatever the stitches you're working, like doing, if you're knitting or you're purling, that's what's going to show up on the right side. So if we wanted garter stitch in the round, how would we make it? Anybody want to take a guess? First answer in the chat gets a free pattern. If I wanted to do garter stitch in the round, how do I do it? First correct answer in the chat room wins a free pattern from me.
Good question.
Mm-hmm. Knowing what I just told you. Purl. So Laura Regan, you would purl, but what does that answer? Like, are you saying you would purl every single round? Because that's not correct. Crochet in agreement is correct. She's the first one. So you would knit one row, and then you would purl the next. That's exactly what you'd have to do. Because when you are doing garter stitch flat, right, you are knitting on top of purls and purling on top of knit. So when you want to do garter stitch in the round, you essentially have to do what you would do to get stockinette flat in order to get garter stitch. It seems counterintuitive, but once you break it down to what the stitches are, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So to get garter stitch in the round, you would have to knit around and then purl around, and then knit around and then purl around. To get stockinette in the round, you just knit. If you wanted reverse stockinette, you would purl. Does that make sense? That's the beauty of ribbing. It's the same. It's reversible. So you knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. That's a very good question. Somebody who said that earlier. All right. Because of that reason, because stitches look different in the round versus flat, you always have to really pay attention to the instructions you're following along. If you're working, say a stitch pattern, really pay attention to if that stitch pattern was written in rows or in the round, because that will affect the look of your actual piece. Cool. Somebody says all that makes sense. That's great. That makes you feel good. Any other questions?
Catherine, have that person who won the free pattern email me at contact@marleybird too.
Yep.
I did do that already.
She just did it.
You're
she beat you to it.
Top of it. You're so
awesome.
On top
so
of
Chrissy,
it.
yeah, just send them a coupon code and they can pick any pattern in my Ravelry store. Totally cool.
Sure thing.
Very
Looks
cool.
like Diane's asking if we're going to learn to do a simple double knitting project at some point, which I actually don't even know what that means. But...
Diane, that would be way down the road, like way down the road. But I would not be opposed to that. It's just we definitely have to move on. Like there are knitters in our group right now that literally don't know how to do that either. So that would be like an all hands on deck sort of project.
I want to pop in and say also a lot of people. Oh, my dog is getting my Chow-goo needles over here. Oh, my puppy. Sorry about that. A lot of people are also asking if we're going to do a crochet boot camp for knitters. And I just want to remind people that at some point we're going to get to all of this stuff. We're going to do as much as we can with knitting for crocheters, and then we're going to see what we can do the opposite way. So we're going to take it in time, but yes, to the people who have asked about that.
Yeah, there's only one of me. If you guys haven't put it together, I'm really stressed. So I can't add anything more at this time, but I will be doing that later because I love my knitters just as much as I love my crocheters. And I want
Yes, and
everybody to be bike
you
crafty.
wouldn't want her to do both at the same time, right? Because you can't give your full attention and 100% to two things at one time. So the fact that we're really focusing on this, we're going to make a whole bunch of knitters, and then those same people can then jump in and help out you knitters who
Right.
want to learn how to crochet.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool. What's going to be awesome, like I said, so the Yarn Inspirations knit along is coming up soon. So it'll be exciting to get you guys to the point where you can jump in on that. Like all you new crocheters, you can jump into the piece. And what's great is there's so much going on in that knit along that you might at first look at it and be like, there's just no way I could do it. But I'm telling you, you're going to be able to do it. You're going to be able to do it. You just got to trust me. Have I led you astray yet? Because you just have to trust me with it. Just have to trust me. It'll be fun. I wouldn't know how to knit if it weren't for Marley. Her tutorials with her mom are the only ones that have helped me. Oh, that makes me feel good. Mom was going to come today, but she decided to stay home with dad, so she didn't make it over here. Very cool. All right, guys. So it's almost 2:00. I've got to get to track practice. This was a nice, lovely little video here. Thank goodness we were able to get on live. It's so nice to have all of you here. Let's see here. I have a late weaving ends question. Okay, what is your question? Mama Huey or Mom O'Huey?
Mama Huey, it looks like. Mama Huey, you're right.
Okay, how do we weave in ends when yarn and pattern is lace? You know what? Burying in your ends is a really good way to do it. Instead of just following the stitches, it's good to bury your ends. And I would do it where you actually split up the plies of the yarn and bury your ends inside the actual yarn of the lace. So using chenille needles and splitting up your yarn for that. There's a whole video on how to bury your ends that I did with Ann Burke right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. You can check that out. That's what I would do.
I just dropped a link in the chat to the lesson where you showed it briefly in our lesson on changing colors and weaving in ends.
Mm-hmm.
And that also includes the video you just mentioned.
Perfect.
So that link now in the chat.
Perfect. All about it. All right, that's it from us, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful week. I can't wait to see your homework. Sort of a little thing here. If you did the Tournament of Stitches and you would like me to highlight your pattern, I would love for you to email me submissions@marleybird.com. Email me a picture, and several pictures if you want. I would love it either, your finished project flat, if it's on a dog, if it's on a kid or you or whatever. And then give me a testimonial of what your favorite part was of the Tournament of Stitches. I would love to have those because I'm loving looking at all of those images. They are so fantastic. And I want to use them for promoting the Tournament of Stitches pattern on Instagram and on YouTube and all that. So if you didn't catch the Marley's Minions video I did earlier, that's what it was all about. So that email is submissions@marleybird.com. You can check that out. All right, guys.